Jason Carter thought grabbing the quiet girl in front of the entire cafeteria would make him look untouchable. 10 seconds later, nobody in Roosevelt High was laughing anymore. The sound of a plastic lunch tray hitting the floor echoed through the cafeteria as hundreds of students froze mid-conversation. Phones that had been raised to record a humiliating prank slowly lowered. A carton of milk rolled across the polished tile floor before stopping beside a table where nobody moved. In the center of the silence stood Claire Bennett, her gray hoodie slightly wrinkled, her breathing calm, her eyes steady. And beneath her, pinned awkwardly against the cafeteria floor, was Jason Carter, the most feared senior in the school, staring upward in complete disbelief. Just 10 seconds earlier, the room had been roaring with laughter. Roosevelt High sat on the edge of a quiet Ohio suburb, where football banners hung proudly from brick walls and popularity mattered almost as much as grades. Students moved through the wide hallways in loud clusters every morning, trading gossip, filming TikToks, and chasing attention any way they could. And in a place like Roosevelt, people noticed weakness immediately. Claire Bennett had arrived 3 weeks earlier carrying nothing but a faded backpack and a transfer slip from another district 2 counties away. She didn't dress like the other girls. No expensive sneakers. No makeup tutorials playing loudly from her phone. No carefully staged selfies during lunch. Her blonde hair stayed tied back in a simple ponytail, and she spent most afternoons alone beneath the old oak tree near the football field reading paperbacks, while everyone else crowded around the parking lot or gym entrance. Most students assumed she was shy. Others decided she was weird. Jason Carter decided she was entertainment. At 18, Jason carried himself like Roosevelt High belonged to him. Varsity wrestling captain, starting linebacker, 6'2", broad shoulders, loud voice, easy smile when teachers were watching. But away from adults, he treated humiliation like a sport. He loved audiences, loved reactions, loved turning nervous freshmen into jokes his friends could upload online before the final bell rang. Most people tolerated it because nobody wanted to become his next target. And the moment Jason noticed Claire refusing to react to his comments in the hallway, something about her silence bothered him. Quiet people made Jason uncomfortable. He didn't understand them. During her second week at Roosevelt, someone accidentally knocked her books onto the hallway floor. Jason laughed louder than anyone. Claire quietly picked them up without saying a word. 2 days later, one of Jason's friends snatched her earbuds during lunch and tossed them across the table while everyone laughed. Claire simply walked over, picked them up, and returned to her seat. No anger, no tears, no complaint. The lack of reaction only encouraged them. Because to people like Jason Carter, silence looked exactly like weakness. But there were moments, small, almost invisible moments, that didn't fit the image everyone had created of Claire Bennett. Once, during gym class, a basketball flew toward the side of her head from nearly 20 feet away. Without even looking fully up from tying her sneaker, Claire lifted one hand and caught it cleanly inches from her face. Another time, a teacher brushed against her shoulder unexpectedly in the hallway, and Claire stepped sideways with startling speed before instantly pretending nothing happened. Tiny things. Strange things. Things most people ignored. But not everyone. Coach Ramirez, the school's assistant wrestling coach, noticed. And the longer he watched the quiet new girl move through crowded hallways with calm eyes and measured steps, the more uneasy he became. Because Coach Ramirez had spent 20 years around athletes, fighters, and competitors. And there was something familiar in the way Claire Bennett carried herself. Something disciplined. Something controlled. Something Jason Carter was far too arrogant to recognize before it was too late. By the beginning of October, Claire Bennett had become something unusual at Roosevelt High. She was invisible and famous at the same time. People barely knew her, yet everyone seemed to have an opinion about her. Some students called her the mute girl. Others joked that she looked like someone who had wandered out of an old library by mistake. Jason Carter preferred a different nickname. He called her Ghost Girl because, according to him, she walked around school like she was afraid of being seen. Every time he said it, his friends laughed a little too hard. That was the thing about Jason. People laughed before they even understood the joke because keeping Jason entertained felt safer than becoming his next target. The Friday before everything changed, rain hammered against the school windows while students packed into the cafeteria during lunch period. The room smelled like pizza grease, wet jackets, and cheap floor cleaner. Claire sat alone near the far vending machines with a paperback novel resting beside her untouched tray of fries. Her hood was pulled loosely over her blonde ponytail, and her attention stayed fixed on the rain sliding down the glass. Across the cafeteria, Jason spotted her immediately. He sat at the center table surrounded by football players, cheerleaders, and students eager to stay close to Roosevelt's social king. Jason leaned back in his chair, spinning a basketball lazily on one finger while one of his friends scrolled through videos on his phone. "There she is," Jason muttered with a grin. "Ghost girl." A few heads turned toward Claire. She did not react. "I still think she is hiding from the witness protection program," one boy joked. Laughter spread across the table. Jason smirked, but his eyes stayed fixed on Claire with growing irritation. Most people reacted eventually. Embarrassment, fear, anger, something. Claire gave him nothing, and the silence was beginning to feel personal. Nearby, Coach Ramirez stood near the cafeteria entrance, speaking quietly with another teacher. His attention drifted toward Jason's table more than once. He had seen enough school dynamics over the years to recognize when a situation was escalating. Jason was not just teasing anymore. He was testing boundaries. "You ever notice she walks like she expects someone to jump her?" one of the wrestlers asked. Jason laughed. "Please. She probably cries if somebody raises their voice." At that exact moment, Claire calmly reached down beside her chair without even looking and caught the soda can that accidentally rolled off another student's table before it hit the floor. The movement was quick. Too quick. Smooth and automatic. Coach Ramirez noticed immediately. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. Jason noticed too, but instead of caution, curiosity flashed across his face. "Okay," he said slowly. "That was weird." Claire quietly handed the soda back to the embarrassed freshman beside her and returned to reading as if nothing had happened. No smile. No attempt to impress anyone. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I am telling you," he said, lowering his voice. "There is something off about her." One of the cheerleaders rolled her eyes. "Maybe she just wants to be left alone, Jason." The table fell quiet for half a second before Jason scoffed loudly. "Nobody comes to Roosevelt acting mysterious unless they want attention." Then his expression shifted. The grin returned, but colder this time. Dangerous in a way his friends recognized immediately. "You know what?" Jason said, standing from the table. "I think Ghost Girl needs help coming out of her shell." Several students exchanged nervous glances. Phones slowly appeared in hands around the cafeteria. Because whenever Jason Carter stood up smiling like that, somebody usually ended up humiliated before lunch was over. And as Claire Bennett continued staring calmly at the rain outside, completely unaware of the crowd beginning to watch her, the atmosphere inside Roosevelt High started changing in ways nobody fully understood yet. Even Coach Ramirez felt it. That strange pressure in the air right before something goes very wrong. Jason Carter walked across the cafeteria with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. Conversations softened as students noticed where he was heading. A few people nudged their friends and pointed discreetly toward Claire Bennett sitting alone near the windows. Even before Jason reached her table, phones began rising quietly above trays of pizza and paper cups. Roosevelt High loved drama almost as much as football. Jason stopped directly across from Claire and planted both hands on the table with a loud clap that made several students jump. Claire slowly looked up from her book. Her expression stayed calm, almost distant, as if she had expected this moment for days. "Well, look who finally decided to join society," Jason announced loudly. His friends laughed from across the cafeteria. Claire said nothing. Jason tilted his head, studying her face. "You know, people are starting to think you cannot actually talk." More laughter spread through nearby tables. Claire quietly closed her book and slid it into her backpack. "I can talk," she answered softly. The room reacted immediately. Some students exchanged surprised looks because many of them had never even heard her voice before. Jason grinned wider. "There she is." He pulled out the empty chair across from her and sat down backward, resting his arms along the top. "See? This is progress already." Claire glanced briefly toward the cafeteria exit, as if considering whether leaving was worth the trouble. Then she looked back down at her tray. Jason noticed. "Oh no," he said with mock disappointment. "You are not walking away yet. Everybody finally gets to meet Ghost Girl." A few students laughed nervously while others looked uncomfortable. Coach Ramirez remained near the cafeteria doors, his attention fixed completely on Jason now. Something about Claire's stillness unsettled him more with every passing second. Jason grabbed one of Claire's fries from her tray and tossed it casually into his mouth. "So tell us," he continued loudly. "What is your deal? You in some secret cult or something?" Claire did not answer. Jason leaned closer. "Or maybe you think you are better than everybody here." Still nothing. The silence irritated him instantly. His smile tightened. Around the cafeteria, the atmosphere began shifting from amusement to tension. Because Jason Carter thrived on reactions, and Claire Bennett refused to give him one. "You know what your problem is?" Jason said finally. "People like you walk around acting quiet because you think it makes you interesting." Claire slowly lifted her eyes toward him again. Calm, unshaken. "I just want to eat. Lunch," she replied. Jason laughed loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Then maybe you should learn how to act normal first." One of his friends shouted. "Ask her if she escaped from military school." More laughter followed. But this time, Claire did something different. She stood up. The movement was smooth and controlled, not angry or rushed. She picked up her backpack carefully and stepped sideways, intending to leave without another word. Jason's grin faded slightly. For the first time all afternoon, he looked annoyed instead of entertained. Because in his mind, walking away meant losing control of the scene. And Jason Carter hated losing control. Claire Bennett had almost reached the cafeteria doors when Jason Carter stood up, so quickly his chair scraped loudly across the tile floor. The sharp sound cut through the room like a warning. Students turned fully now, no longer pretending not to watch. Even the freshmen near the vending machines stopped talking. Something about Jason's expression had changed. The joking energy was gone. In its place was irritation mixed with wounded pride, the kind that appeared whenever somebody refused to play along with his performance. "Hey," Jason called after her loudly. Claire kept walking. That only made things worse. Jason glanced around the cafeteria and saw people watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Roosevelt High had built his reputation on dominance, on never letting someone walk away from him. And now the quiet new girl was doing exactly that. One of Jason's teammates chuckled awkwardly from the table behind him. "Looks like Ghost Girl is done with you, man." The comment was harmless, but Jason heard the challenge buried inside it. His jaw tightened instantly. Across the room, Coach Ramirez took a step away from the wall. "Jason," he warned sharply. But Jason barely heard him. Pride and humiliation were already pushing him forward. Claire had almost reached the exit when Jason moved quickly through the rows of tables behind her. Students shifted aside to let him pass. Some excited, some nervous. Phones lifted higher. Everybody sensed the moment building towards something ugly. Claire stopped. Only when Jason stepped directly in front of the cafeteria doors, blocking her path. "I was talking to you," he said. Claire looked up at him quietly. Up close, Jason towered over her, broad-shouldered and confident, wearing the smug expression that usually made people back down immediately. But Claire's face did not change. No fear, no panic, just calm eyes studying him carefully. "Move," she said softly. A few students reacted with surprised murmurs. Nobody talked to Jason Carter that way. His smile returned, but it looked forced now. "Or what?" he asked. Claire shifted her backpack slightly higher onto her shoulder. "I do not want problems." Jason laughed loudly, turning toward the crowd as if inviting them into the joke. Did everybody hear that? She does not want problems. Laughter scattered across the cafeteria, though weaker than before. The atmosphere felt different now. Tighter. Uneasy. Jason stepped closer. Too close. "You know what your issue is?" he said quietly enough that only nearby students could hear. "You walk around acting like you are above everybody." Claire glanced briefly toward the side exit again, still searching for the easiest way to leave peacefully. That tiny movement irritated Jason all over again. To him, it looked dismissive. And Jason Carter could tolerate fear. He could tolerate anger. But he could not tolerate being ignored. Without thinking, he reached out suddenly and grabbed the strap of Claire's backpack to stop her from moving past him. The cafeteria fell silent almost instantly. Coach Ramirez froze mid-step near the drink machines. One of the cheerleaders lowered her phone slowly, her smile disappearing. Because the second Jason touched her, something changed in Claire Bennett's expression for the very first time. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. Calm, cold recognition. like someone hearing an alarm they had hoped would never go off again. For a moment, nobody in the cafeteria moved. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows, but inside Roosevelt High, the entire room seemed trapped in one long breath. Jason Carter still held the strap of Claire Bennett's backpack, though the confidence on his face had started to crack around the edges, because the quiet girl standing in front of him no longer looked nervous or uncomfortable. She looked focused. Claire slowly turned her head toward Jason's hand gripping her bag. Then she looked back up at him with the same calm expression someone might use before giving a final warning. "Let go," she said quietly. Her voice was not emotional. That was what unsettled people the most. No shaking, no fear, just certainty. Jason laughed automatically, but the sound came out thinner this time. "Or what?" he repeated. Nearby students shifted uneasily. A sophomore near the vending machines whispered, "Dude, maybe just leave her alone." Jason ignored him completely. Coach Ramirez was already moving through the cafeteria now, weaving between tables with growing urgency. Years of experience told him something important that everybody else still missed. Claire Bennett was not frozen because she was scared. She was controlling herself. Jason gave the backpack strap another tug, trying to pull her slightly closer while his friends watched from across the room. "Come on," he mocked. "Say something interesting for once." Claire did not stumble, did not panic. She simply adjusted her footing almost invisibly, one sneaker sliding half an inch across the tile floor with smooth precision. Coach Ramirez noticed immediately. His eyes widened. That was not random movement. It was trained balance, the kind drilled into people through years of repetition. "Jason," Coach Ramirez called sharply. "Back away." Now, the command echoed across the cafeteria. Students looked between the coach and Claire with growing confusion. Jason smirked toward the crowd again, desperate to recover control of the moment. "Everybody relax," he said loudly. "Ghost Girl and I are just talking." But even his friends were no longer laughing the same way. Something about Claire's stillness was affecting the room now. The atmosphere had shifted completely. One of the football players lowered his phone slowly. Another muttered, "This feels weird." Claire finally spoke again, her eyes never leaving Jason's. "You should stop." Simple words. Calm words. But they landed heavily in the silence. Jason felt it too, though pride pushed harder than caution. Because by now, too many people were watching. Walking away would feel like surrender. And Jason Carter had built his entire identity around never backing down in front of an audience. "You think I am scared of you?" he asked quietly. Claire said nothing. That silence hit him harder than any insult could have. Jason tightened his grip one final time. And in that exact second, Coach Ramirez suddenly stopped walking. His expression changed completely as recognition flashed across his face like lightning. Because he had finally remembered where he had seen those movements before. 2 years earlier, at a regional youth martial arts tournament in Columbus, he had watched a teenage girl dismantle competitors with the same calm eyes, the same quiet posture, and the same controlled footwork. The announcer had called her one of the best young defensive grapplers in the state. Standing in Roosevelt High cafeteria beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a worn backpack, Claire Bennett did not look anything like a champion. Which was exactly why Jason Carter never saw the next 10 seconds coming. The silence inside Roosevelt High cafeteria became almost unnatural. Students stood frozen beside tables and drink machines, staring at Claire Bennett as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Coach Ramirez felt his stomach tighten because he already knew what Jason Carter still did not understand. The girl standing calmly in front of him was not cornered. She was deciding how much restraint to use. Jason noticed the coach's expression and frowned briefly. "What?" he snapped without looking away from Claire. Coach Ramirez took another careful step forward. "Jason," he said slowly, firmly, "let go of the bag." But pride had already trapped Jason too deeply. Hundreds of eyes were on him now. Football players, cheerleaders, freshmen holding phones halfway in the air. If he backed down, even for a second, the entire school would remember it. Jason tightened his grip again. "Everybody needs to relax," he muttered. Claire's eyes dropped once more toward his hand holding the backpack strap. Then she inhaled slowly, calmly. The movement was almost invisible. Coach Ramirez recognized it immediately. Preparation. "Jason," the coach warned again, louder this time. "Do not touch her." But the warning came 1 second too late. Jason gave the backpack another sharp pull, trying to drag Claire slightly off balance. What happened next unfolded so quickly most students could not process it in real time. Claire moved with smooth precision, not panic. One small step sideways. One controlled turn. Her hand redirected Jason's grip while her balance shifted underneath his movement instead of fighting against it. Suddenly, Jason stumbled awkwardly forward, losing control of his own momentum. Gasps exploded across the cafeteria. Before anyone fully understood what they were seeing, Jason found himself lowered hard onto the cafeteria floor, pinned in place without Claire ever appearing angry or out of control. A phone clattered from someone's hand nearby. The room went completely silent. No shouting, no cheering, just stunned silence. Jason blinked rapidly, confusion flooding his face. 1 second earlier, he had been performing for the crowd. Now he was staring up at fluorescent ceiling lights while the entire cafeteria watched in disbelief. Claire maintained calm control, keeping enough distance to avoid harming him while making it absolutely clear he could not continue grabbing her. The entire exchange had lasted less than 10 seconds. Coach Ramirez stopped beside them, his eyes wide with disbelief even though he had anticipated something coming. "That is enough," he said quickly, though his tone carried more shock than authority now. Claire released Jason immediately and stepped backward the moment the coach spoke. No aggression, no celebration. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her gray hoodie and picked up her backpack from the floor. Around the cafeteria, students stared speechlessly. The football players at Jason's table looked completely frozen. One of the cheerleaders slowly whispered, "What just happened?" Another student replayed the recording on his phone with shaking hands. Jason sat upright slowly, humiliated confusion burning across his face. His hair was messy, his breathing uneven, his pride shattered in front of the entire school. But what haunted him most was not pain. It was the realization that Claire Bennett had controlled the situation completely from beginning to end. She had not lashed out emotionally. She had not lost control. She had simply stopped him. Efficiently. Calmly. Like someone who had done it before. Claire looked down at Jason for one brief moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke quietly enough that only the nearest students could hear. "I told you to stop." Nobody laughed this time. Nobody moved. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. And as Claire Bennett turned calmly toward the cafeteria doors while hundreds of stunned students watched her walk away, Roosevelt High finally understood something important about silence. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is also the one you should never underestimate. For the rest of lunch period, Roosevelt High felt strangely quiet. Conversations returned eventually, but softer now, cautious and uncertain. Students kept replaying the video clips spreading rapidly through group chats and social media feeds. Every angle showed the same unbelievable thing. Jason Carter, Roosevelt's untouchable senior athlete, had tried to intimidate the quiet transfer student in front of half the school. 10 seconds later, he was the one staring helplessly at the cafeteria ceiling while Claire Bennett stood over him without a single trace of panic on her face. By 7th period, rumors had already transformed into legends. Some students claimed Claire had trained with military instructors. Others swore she came from a family of professional fighters. One freshman insisted she had seen Claire compete in Las Vegas years earlier, though nobody believed that version. The only thing everyone agreed on was this. Jason Carter was never supposed to lose control of a situation like that, especially not in public. Jason himself sat silently in the locker room after practice, staring down at the floor while the sounds of football players changing clothes echoed around him. Usually, he dominated every conversation in the room. Usually people laughed when he spoke. But now, every glance in his direction felt different. Curious. Careful. Embarrassed for him. One of the younger players finally broke the silence. "Man," he muttered carefully. "Who even is that girl?" Jason clenched his jaw but said nothing. Because the truth unsettled him more than the humiliation itself. He had replayed the moment repeatedly in his head since lunch. Claire had not reacted emotionally. She had not hesitated. The instant he grabbed her bag, she moved automatically, like somebody trained to stay calm under pressure. It had felt less like fighting and more like walking into a locked door he never saw coming. Across campus, Claire sat alone beneath the large oak tree near the practice field as cold autumn wind scattered leaves across the grass around her sneakers. Her paperback rested open in her lap, though she had not turned a page in several minutes. For the first time since transferring to Roosevelt, students walking past slowed down when they saw her. Some whispered quietly. Others looked away immediately when she noticed them. Nobody laughed anymore. Coach Ramirez approached slowly from the sidewalk with his hands tucked into the pockets of his gray jacket. Claire looked up calmly as he stopped beside the bench. "You handled yourself carefully in there," he said after a long pause. Claire studied him for a moment before answering. "I tried to." Coach Ramirez nodded slowly. "Most teenagers with your training would not have stayed that controlled." Claire lowered her eyes toward the book in her lap. The wind lifted a few strands of blonde hair across her face. "My father taught me that losing control is how people get hurt." Coach Ramirez remained quiet for a second. Then he asked the question lingering in his mind all afternoon. "Columbus Youth Invitational," he said carefully. 2 years ago. Were you there?" Claire's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the paperback. For the first time since he met her, genuine emotion flickered briefly across her face. Not pride. Sadness. "Yes," she answered softly. Coach Ramirez exhaled slowly as realization settled fully into place. He remembered now. Claire Bennett had not just competed there. She had dominated the tournament while reporters called her one of the most technically gifted young defensive grapplers in Ohio. Then suddenly, after winning nearly every major competition for 2 straight years, she disappeared completely. No interviews. No social media. Nothing. Looking at the quiet girl sitting beneath the oak tree while orange leaves drifted across the ground around her, Coach Ramirez finally understood something Roosevelt High still did not know yet. Claire Bennett had never transferred to their school looking for attention. She had come there trying to escape it. Monday morning arrived beneath gray skies and cold October wind, but Roosevelt High no longer felt like the same school Claire Bennett had entered 3 weeks earlier. Students who once brushed past her without noticing now lowered their voices when she walked through the halls. Locker conversations paused. Phones disappeared into pockets. Even teachers looked at her differently after hearing dozens of exaggerated versions of what happened in the cafeteria. Claire ignored all of it. She moved through the crowded hallways with the same quiet posture, her faded backpack hanging from one shoulder, her eyes focused straight ahead. But rumors moved faster than silence ever could. By second period, nearly everyone in the school had seen at least one video clip from Friday. Most recordings were shaky and incomplete, but they all captured the same thing that nobody could explain. Jason Carter had tried to intimidate someone he assumed was weak. Seconds later, he looked completely helpless while Claire Bennett stood calm and composed beside him. To many students, it felt almost unreal. At lunch, the cafeteria sounded quieter than usual. The loud confidence surrounding Jason's table had vanished. His friends still sat together near the center of the room, but nobody was performing anymore. No shouting. No jokes aimed across the cafeteria. No videos being filmed for attention. Jason himself stared down at his tray without touching his food. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes from a weekend spent reliving Friday over and over again. The humiliation followed him. Everywhere now. Hallway whispers. Smirks from underclassmen. Teammates pretending not to mention the videos spreading online beyond Roosevelt High. What hurt most was that nobody viewed him as untouchable anymore. Across the cafeteria, Claire sat near the windows exactly where she always did. Alone, reading quietly while rain streaked softly across the glass behind her. But today something unexpected happened. A freshman girl approached her table, nervously carrying a lunch tray. "Can I sit here?" she asked softly. Claire looked up with slight surprise before nodding once. Within minutes, another student joined them. Then another. Not because Claire suddenly became popular. Roosevelt students sensed something different around her now. Safety. Calm. Strength without cruelty. For the first time in years, some students realized there was another kind of power besides intimidation. Jason noticed all of it from across the room. The laughter surrounding Claire was soft and genuine, completely different from the forced laughter people once gave him. Something twisted painfully in his chest as he watched her helping a nervous freshman with algebra homework while barely speaking above a whisper. She was not bragging about Friday, not retelling the story, not humiliating him back. That made everything worse somehow. Coach Ramirez sat down beside Jason quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of trays and distant conversations filled the cafeteria around them. Finally, the coach said, You know what the difference is between confidence and insecurity? Jason kept staring forward. What? Confident people do not need audiences. Jason swallowed hard, but said nothing. Coach Ramirez leaned back slightly in his chair. Claire Bennett spent years competing in front of crowds larger than this entire school. State tournaments, regional championships, reporters following her around after matches. Jason looked up slowly, stunned. Then why does she act like that? The coach's expression softened slightly. Because attention cost her more than you understand. Across the cafeteria, Claire laughed quietly at something the freshman girl said beside her. It was the first time most students had ever seen her smile. The room seemed to notice all at once. And for Jason Carter, the realization landed harder than anything else had. The quiet girl he tried to humiliate had never been weak. She had simply been mature enough not to make other people feel small in order to feel important herself. The cafeteria fell into thoughtful silence around him as that truth settled heavily across Roosevelt High, like the rain tapping softly against the windows. 2 weeks later, Roosevelt High had almost stopped talking about the cafeteria incident out loud. But the silence around it carried more weight than the rumors ever did. Students still glanced toward Claire Bennett when she walked through the hallways, though now those looks carried respect instead of curiosity. Teachers noticed changes too. The cafeteria felt calmer. Freshmen no longer avoided certain tables out of fear. Even hallway arguments seemed to end faster whenever Claire happened to be nearby, not because she interfered, but because people suddenly thought twice about confusing quietness with weakness. Jason Carter changed the most. At first, many students expected him to retaliate somehow. That was the version of Jason everyone knew. Proud, loud, unable to let humiliation go. But something inside him had shifted the moment he realized Claire Bennett could have embarrassed him far worse than she did and chose not to. For days after the incident, he avoided eye contact with almost everyone. Practice became quieter. His jokes disappeared. The endless need to dominate every room slowly faded beneath the uncomfortable weight of self-awareness. One cold Friday afternoon, Jason walked alone across the football field after practice while stadium lights flickered against the darkening sky. The sharp autumn air carried the scent of wet grass and distant rain. Near the bleachers, he spotted Claire sitting on the lowest row with a paperback resting beside her backpack. She wore the same gray hoodie, sleeves pulled over her hands against the cold. Jason hesitated. For a second, it looked like he might turn around. Then he slowly walked toward her. Claire looked up calmly as he approached. Though her expression remained unreadable, Jason stopped several feet away with his hands shoved awkwardly into the pockets of his varsity jacket. The confident athlete Roosevelt High feared suddenly looked like an ordinary teenager struggling to find words. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Claire studied him for a long moment while wind rattled softly through the empty bleachers around them. "You do," she answered. Jason lowered his eyes briefly. "I was trying to make myself look important." He let out a small humorless laugh. Guess that did not work out too well. Claire remained silent, waiting. Jason rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "The thing is, after what happened, everybody kept talking about how strong you are." He shook his head slowly. "But honestly, the strongest thing you did was stop when you could have humiliated me worse." For the first time since he walked over, Claire's expression softened slightly. The stadium lights reflected faintly across the wet aluminum bleachers as she looked out toward the empty football field. "My father used to tell me something before every tournament," she said quietly. "He said the point of training was never to hurt people. It was to protect yourself without losing who you are." Jason listened carefully without interrupting. "Most people think strength is about making others afraid of you," Claire continued softly. "But real strength is having control when you are angry." The wind swept fallen leaves across the track below them. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle echoed from another practice field. Jason nodded slowly, absorbing every word. For the first time in a long while, nobody at Roosevelt High was performing for an audience. No phones, no laughter, no crowd waiting to see who would win. Just two teenagers sitting beneath cold stadium lights, understanding something most adults never learn. Silence did not mean weakness. Kindness did not mean vulnerability. And respect could never be forced through fear. Jason stood quietly after a moment. "For what it is worth," he said carefully, "I am glad you transferred here." Claire looked at him for a second before giving the smallest smile. "Real this time." Genuine. Me too. As Jason walked away across the darkening football field, the loudest boy in Roosevelt High finally understood the lesson the quiet girl had known all along. The people who truly possess strength rarely feel the need to prove it. And that day, beneath the cold Ohio sky, Roosevelt High remembered what dignity looked like.